Hi, I'm Jenya DeLima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the podcast for people who write, edit, read, or listen. Our guest today is KJ Warawa, author and plotter extraordinaire. And this is Plotting, Plotting, and More Plotting, episode 241 of the podcast. Hi, KJ. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you. And now you
Hi,
can tell
Jenya.
everyone how you plot a book faster than I write my weekly grocery list.
Hi, Jenya. Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, if you want to tell people a little bit about who you are, what you write.
I write paranormal romance with a heavy spin on romantic suspense. My first series in Magic has an ongoing theme, but each book features a separate couple and has a happily ever after.
Perfect. So, what goes into plotting one of these books?
Before I go into my process, I want to talk a little bit about my belief about processes because I have a background. I'm a certified Lean Six Sigma black belt, which means I work with processes, a process improvement, how to make more efficiencies out of them. And there's different kinds of processes. If you're going to build a car and you put piece together, that's a manufacturing process that a lot of people, once that process is created, a lot of people can just copy. Oh, here's how we're going to make a car in this plant. But when you're talking about something that is a creative process, like writing and plotting, it is very difficult to take someone else's process because that's how their mind thinks. And all our minds are different, of course. So when you pick up a book on plotting or writing, what you are actually doing is going into the mind of that author that's saying,
Yes.
this is how I do it. So your mind is going to work differently. So when I started doing it, I started picking up all these books and they weren't working for me because that's how they did it. But you have to first know how you are going to work. So
Right.
what I did was I studied plot structure and I studied character arcs. And then I would start trying to work on a process. I'd pick up a book and say, okay, how does this work? And I would try, and I instinctively knew that things weren't working. So then I would figure out, where is it not working?
So, did
And
that happen for you right away, or did you have to go through their entire step by step before you realized this really isn't for me and I'm not getting anything out of this?
No, I didn't have to go through their entire book because I learned early on I would go through a few steps and saying, this isn't working. I
Hmm.
think the most I ever got through a book was halfway through before I said, no, this isn't.
That's really good
So
that you're bringing this up about it's not just about being able to follow steps, but it's about knowing who you are as an author and how you work and even what style fits you.
exactly. And who you are as a person, right? Because what if you're a person that, wings a lot of things and you can do that? You're just really natural at it. And you can say, okay, I'm just going to do this and this. That's all I need. And I'm just going to go for it. You're
Yep.
not a big plotter. Me, I plot everything.
Yes.
I plot going to the grocery store. I need to plot. So when I pick up a craft book that has only a few steps, then I know it's not going to work for me. But it doesn't mean I can't learn something from that book.
Yeah, which is such a good point. So people don't just quickly dismiss this as useless to them. It could still have something of value in there.
Right. So I would be following all these books and it wasn't working. So once I learned that, I was able to say, okay, now I can start applying some of these principles. And this book, maybe I took this part of it from, and that book, I took that part. I ended up relating to the three act structure. That's
Yeah.
what just worked for me. But maybe someone else doesn't like the three act structure and they want to do, I don't know, the snowflake method or something
Right.
else.
And it could differ too from book to book for them also. So then they have that complication added on top of it. So why do you think that knowing the structure helps in terms of plotting? What about that aids that process?
I think because, like I said, a process is so personal. Like a creative process is very personal. Personal. So if you don't know what you need in a book as far as structure goes, then how are you going to figure out what process you need?
Mm,
So by understanding, okay, here is, I know in the three act structure, I need so many scenes. I need so many key scenes, like the pinch points, the midpoint, that kind of thing. Then I was able to say to myself, well, how am I going to plot that?
Oh, yeah, that's really good. It's almost like being able to look at it like an outline and being able to see, okay, if I need this to happen by here, then I better start picking up the action here. So it gives you really like a template to follow.
Right. And I think that's a really key point in the fact that people say, okay, here's the 3 act structure, here's my process.
Hmm.
But it's not a process. A process is, to use the definition, steps or activities that give you an end result. So understanding those points in the plot structure are not steps, really. But when you're plotting, you want to say, okay, how am I going to figure out what that point in the story is?
Yeah.
So it took me 4 books before I really figured out what my process is. And saying 4 is actually not really accurate considering I wrote the first book 6 times. So let's say 10 times writing a book before I figured out what my process was.
I think that's
Um,
important for people to know too, that it's not going to just come automatically and one day be like, ding, I figured it out. That, yeah, you do have to work through it. And it's another process of figuring out, okay, here's what really does work for me and here's what doesn't.
right. And then to add to that, you need continuous improvement.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the things that are important to you when you are doing plotting or that have helped, like the character arc. Do you mind explaining why you think those are helpful, how they contribute to that?
Absolutely. When I was writing a book and I came up with all these things, okay, I know what a pinch point is now. I know what the climactic scene is now. But when I started putting it all together and I had the character goal wrong and the lie wrong, well, then the story fell flat.
Hmm.
So it's great to understand what all those things are, but they're all based on what this character is going through. So if you don't understand the character arc, then how are you going to know if that pinch point or that other scene or the midpoint is doing what you need it to do?
Yeah, exactly. And we talk on here a lot about how characters are so pivotal to everything else that happens because it does all revolve around them for the most part, at least in fiction. So it makes sense then that they also contribute to figuring out your plot and the plotting process.
Right. And when I first started, like I said, that first book, I wrote it so many times. And by the time, and I didn't just revise it 6 times, I rewrote it so that the characters were different. Um, the protagonist was different. All the scenes were different. I mean, it really wasn't the same book at the end at all. I just had the same name, but that's about it. So one of the scenes I had, I thought a couple of them, I thought they were really cool. And I'm sure you've even talked about that expression, killing your darlings. You have to know when to
Yes.
get rid of things that don't work. But how do you know they don't work? And that's the whole thing. If you understand structure and character arcs and things like that, then you know that scene is not working. It's not pulling the plot forward. It's not, developing the characters more. It's cool, totally
Right.
cool.
And that's kind of the answer. If your answer is because it sounds cool, well, you might need to cut it.
Exactly. So that's where I think you need to start. You need to start by understanding story. And when you pick up all those books on plotting, they might help you a little bit, some of them, with understanding story structure and character arc. But how do you know at that point when you're so busy plotting that you understand everything?
Yeah.
So what I did with me is I started to learn, like I said, I started to plot, and then I really had to do self-reflection and say, is this just cool or am I going to really enjoy as a reader, am I going to enjoy this book? And
Hmm.
if my answer is no, then I'm saying, okay, where is my problem?
Hmm.
So understanding processes is also understanding that solutions do not fix problems, they fix root causes of problem. So you can have a big problem, this plot's not working, okay? So, what is the root cause or causes of that plot not working? You have to look and say, okay, is it that this pinch point isn't working? Is it that these characters, you haven't developed them enough? And with me, it started by knowing that the goal was wrong.
Mhm.
And so the lie was wrong.
How
So
did you
then
figure that out? Were there any takeaways that you would give to readers or listeners rather, I'm so used to saying readers with editing, that they could identify this in their own work if they're looking at their plotting? What's something that stands out to you that helps you see that that's what the problem is or that's the root cause?
I would say, is the book interesting? If you were to look at it, like step back and look at it and say, really, is a reader going to enjoy this? If you were to suddenly describe these scenes, and not just a high level, but to really describe these scenes to a reader, are they going to go, wow, that's so cool, I can't wait to get in and read that? Or are they going to give you a funny look and say, oh, yeah, that sounds nice? You know, you want to make sure that it's a reader would really enjoy it.
Yeah, that investment. Yeah.
Another thing not to get caught up in is it's okay. All first drafts are garbage and you can just edit it.
Hmm.
And that's true. But if you are way off on this plot to begin with, and you don't have the goals correct, and you don't have those lies, and all those kinds of things, how much editing are you going to do? Can editing really fix all of that?
Right. That's not even editing anymore. That's just straight out rewriting.
Right. And that's what happened to me. A couple of people said to me, that's okay, you can fix it in editing. And I knew that no, that's not what editing was for. I had to go back and say, where am I having a problem? I know that this is boring. I know that even though that scene is cool, that this is not going to be a good book. And I had to go back and look at it and say, okay, what is wrong?
Hmm.
Now that's where the craft books come in because I understood now story structure, but I didn't understand, and I knew I needed goals, I knew I needed lies, all that,
Hmm.
but looking at it, they weren't working, they didn't make sense. And that's where I had to go back to the books and study some more. Okay, why is my goal not working? I know it's not because when I get to the end of the book,
Hmm.
it just doesn't have a great resolution. So, how am I going to fix that? And that's when I went back and started studying some more. And I did that several times. Like I said, I rewrote this book so many times. And even my second book, I got 30,000 words in and I stopped. I knew the plot wasn't right. So I started again, got 40,000 words in, and I stopped. And people said to me, that's okay, keep going. And I said, no, it's really not a good book. So I had to stop and do it again. And I think, again, understanding all those, how a story works and what people are looking for in a story is going to help you.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you're talking about how it's all these other underlying elements of the narrative that are really what contributes to the plot. The plot is not this separate thing all off by itself that you then take and apply to the story. No, it all has to work together, and here's why. So, do you have an example of maybe where a character goal just was not working, or maybe a character goal that isn't strong enough, and how that affected the plot?
Oh, you got to put me on the spot. Yes. Okay. So in my book, Lost in Magic, the first one, and I changed it so many times. And I originally had Jack as the protagonist, and it is a love story. So
Mhm.
Jack and Meredith are the main characters. And I had Jack who was going to get revenge from what his dad did to him. But it didn't work because at the end of the day, it was all about the love between Meredith and Jack and what they were going through. Now they're magic people. So what they're going through. So how is that revenge going to work with Meredith and Jack? Because Meredith was a character who was spellbound for 20 years, didn't know she was magic, and suddenly she's magic and she has to learn to accept this. And all these other things are going on in her life, and there's been a lot of loss in her life due to magic. So how does that goal of Jack wanting to be with Meredith, how does that revenge work? That goal didn't work. So I ended up making Meredith the main character because she was going through so much that she was the main character, but I didn't know it. I couldn't see that yet. And then his goal then had to be around her. So what does she want? So she's trying to accept magic. Well, he wants her to accept magic. And he wants to, I'm not going to give away the whole plot, but there was a lot of other things. So it was a goal that just didn't work. And in my second book, I had the same problem. And I started with Jo wanting to find the truth, which she ends up being, that's part of her goal, but that wasn't enough of a goal. Oh, I want to find the truth. Okay, yeah, so don't we all?
Right.
So I had to give her a goal, which turned out to be saving her brother. And in that, she was finding the truth, but she needed more of a tangible goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that the reader can really grasp onto and understand the steps that are taken to reach it.
Yes, and when I started really studying and looking at things, goals were actually simple. I get the girl, I don't get the girl. I get the job, I don't get the job. Those kinds of things. Now there can be a lot around it, but when your goal is simple, I think that makes it easier for the reader, not for the reader in that it's so simple they can't understand something complex, because they can, but having a simple goal allows you to put all the other really exciting, complicated things around the plot and what's going to stop them from reaching the goal.
Yeah. And I love that you said that too, because especially since we're talking about the genre you write in, with romance, any kind of romance, we know there's a happily ever after, and we know what the ending is. But that excitement and the tension as you're reading and they're, opposing each other and drifting away from each other when you know they need to be together, so much of that is going to be in the plot and dependent upon their goals and why their goals are not aligning. So then it
Yes,
becomes, well, how do they overcome this?
and that also brings in the lie. So if you don't understand, and some people don't call it a lie, some people, I think they call it a false belief or something else. There might be some other terms to it, but if the lie is not working as well, and with that goal, standing in the way, then again, it's going to fall flat, the story.
Right. Exactly. I think that's why the miscommunication trope is so common within romance, because that's such an easy lie to insert. Oh, he thinks this when he doesn't think that at all.
Right. I did have an author tell me once that she writes romantic suspense, an amazing author, and she has a lot of kidnapping and stuff in her books because she said she never wanted a story that could be solved with just a simple conversation.
Yes, I can see that.
That miscommunication. So, and there are so many great contemporary romances out there with that communication problem. But me, I tend to do the kidnapping stuff as well.
Yes, that's true. I can vouch.
Yeah, I just like the pace.
Definitely lots of suspense. And usually not an easy, and that's the other thing too about with plotting. So how fast do you plot?
It used to take me a really long time, and um I would get through the first act fairly quickly and I'd start writing. But because I am such a plotter, I would then stall because I couldn't go on if I didn't know what was going to happen afterwards. So I would get really, really stuck. So now I have to plot the whole book in the beginning, and it takes me about 3 or 4 days now to plot the entire book. And my books are about somewhere between 70 and 80,000 words. Sometimes they're a little bit longer.
Mhm.
And I have roughly 47 to 50 scenes. And there is a belief out there that if your book is too formulaic, then it's not going to be a good book. And I don't believe that. I believe that I can plot the same in every book, but my story is just going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have different characters. They're going to go through different things, but I'm always going to have a sex scene at the midpoint, and they're going to start to realize that their lies are wrong. So that's how I plot, knowing that that's going to happen at the midpoint. This is going to happen at the pinch point. This is going to happen at the second pinch point,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. So when I plot now, I start by, I write out a rough summary. I just pull up a Word doc and I just start writing, hey, these characters could do this. And I just start writing it out. And if it's in a series, then I've already introduced the characters, or I maybe have a little bit of an idea for them before.
Mm-hmm.
So I also, on this document, because I'm a plotter, I have created a couple tables. So I know what questions I want to ask myself. Do I want to ask myself about the wound and the lie and the external conflict and the internal conflict? So I make a table. I have protagonist 1, protagonist 2, and the antagonist, and I fill them all out once I've done the summary of just diarrhea, getting it all out there. What is this book going to look like? Okay, maybe this. Then I fill out those tables that I've created, so I know a little bit about them. What their hair color is, what their eye color is, that doesn't matter to me. Now, maybe,
Right.
and I'll figure it out later. Even their names aren't that as important to me. Now, maybe some authors it really is, but I've seen a lot of character bios with all that kind of stuff on it. And that's how I started. I started with, okay, what do they do for a living? And what is their eye color? And what's their height? And do they like broccoli? And
Important question.
yes. And so I started that way. And again, that's going back to not understanding structure and not understanding character arc. I started answering all those little questions. And then when I came to plotting the story, they weren't helping me. So I do that summary, then I do the tables where I figure out all the, GMCs, goal, motivation, and conflict, figure out the character arcs. So I also have a table. What are they in the beginning, middle, and end? So I have about 3 tables on this document. And that takes me a day to do that. So once I've done that, then I take a piece of paper and I write down number 1 to number 47 on the piece of paper. But on the left-hand side, I have all the key scenes, like the inciting incident, the first plot point, the first pinch point, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I also take 2 color pens, a blue pen and a pink pen, and I alternate. It's his POV, her POV, his POV, her POV. And then on this one piece of paper, I take a sentence or maybe 2, and I write really small, and I get a rough idea of every single scene.
I mean, that really is impressive. And I think this all goes back to what you were saying in the beginning about knowing who you are, because I can see some people just thinking like, oh, this just sounds like a monumental task, so much work sitting and, color coordinating, but it works for you. And I can say as your editor that you do come up with all these amazing ideas, and you do it so fast, and it's just mind-boggling sometimes to think, well, how did you come up with this entire elaborate plotted book in 3 days?
Well, thank you. But Jenny, I remember my first book, right?
No comment.
No comment. But that was how my process had to change. And I think for anyone listening who's struggling to come up with a process, understand story first, and then understand what you need, and step away from writing and plotting and look at the rest of your life. What do you need when you go on a vacation? Do you just wing it? Or do you need to know exactly where you're going and what you're going to do every time? Or are you in between? You need to know where you're going. You got a rough idea. You maybe booked the hotel, but you don't know anything else. What do you need if you were to plan something else? I don't know, a birthday party, or if you planned your wedding, did you leave it up to someone else, or were you just kind of winging it, or what? What you do on your day to day, and if you have another job besides writing, how do you attack that? And once you know you, then you're going to be able to figure out what you need for plotting.
Seems very simple on a surface level, but it's so insightful because I think sometimes we almost pull our different selves apart. Here's my author persona or my editor persona, and then here's my, regular person persona. And we don't think about how the two are the same person and how something that aids us in our everyday life is also going to aid us in our writing process.
Yes, and I think that's so key because people think when they want to make a change that they're going to wake up the next morning and they're going to be a different person.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a morning person. So, and my youngest daughter, who's 21, is a night owl. Like, she doesn't start waking up till 5 p.m. No, mentally. Physically, she's up early in the morning, but mentally, I swear she comes awake at 5 p.m. So for suddenly me to say, I'm going to write with her in the evening, or she's going to get up and work out and write with me in the morning, is not going to work. I've read a lot of writing and plotting advice from authors who are telling you their process. You need to have a desk in the corner of the room with a certain amount of light, and you need to start writing at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you need, because that's the best time, and you need to do this. Really? I don't believe that. I think you need to understand yourself.
Yes.
And then figure out where your problems are and what a solution, knowing yourself, will fix that root cause of that problem.
That is a great summary. And that focus on the self and that it is individual and that it really comes back to also don't make comparisons too, just because this is easy for one person and they can do it in this amount of time or this is how they do it. That doesn't mean you have to do the same. And that individual approach really highlights that.
Thank you. I think so too.
Well, this has been wonderful. And I think you should come back because you have so much more to say. And I think we should do another episode, maybe on even plotting a series, because that's a whole lesson all on its own, apart from just one book. But I would love to have you back and talk about that and maybe something else.
Thanks, Jenny. It's been fun, and I'd love to come back.
That's all for today. So thank you, everyone, for listening. And please check out the show notes for more information, where we'll have links to KJ's work and her website. Our guest for the next episode is Jeffrey Stevens, and he's going to tell us all about how to be a supporting partner for your author's spouse.